right, welcome to Is Your Liver Healthy? I'm your host, Jeff McIntyre, Vice President at the Global Liver Institute. Now, for people concerned about their liver health, obesity and weight management come up as an issue repeatedly. And the Venn diagram of overweight and obesity with liver disease is significant, especially for fatty liver disease. And the overlap with other parts of society, trying to lose a few pounds or getting frustrated trying to manage our weight and our health properly, well, that's a perfect setup for a helpful pharmacological intervention. Now, there's a long history of obesity medications. In the 1940s, amphetamines were given as an appetite suppressant. And as you can imagine, that didn't really work out, even though the World Health Organization officially recognized obesity as a disease shortly thereafter, taking it from being a mere lifestyle choice or a cosmetic concern to a serious medical condition that required proper intervention and care. These days, there are few medications more prominent and more talked about than GLP-1s. From congressional hearings to celebrity name drops to Super Bowl ads to clinical discussions with patients, GLP-1s are being prescribed, sold online by diet groups, and are being approved for indications beyond just obesity. In fact, a recent study showed that GLP-1s can lower scarring and inflammation in the kidneys. And the clinical trials are very promising for similar impacts for people with different stages of liver disease. So this is going to be a fun episode. We have two experts and friends of Global Liver to talk about the medical and the social, the promise and the reality, and the practical and the possible for GLP-1s and liver health. So let's get started. And welcome Joe Naglowski and Dr. Janice Laster to Is Your Liver Healthy? Joe, why don't you start and tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from?
Yeah, so I'm Joe Naglowski. I manage a group called the Obesity Action Coalition, which is the patient advocacy group in the obesity space. And like many of our members, we have about 100,000 of them. I live with obesity, and we're going to talk about some medicines today that I actually use to control my own obesity and made a huge difference in my own health and my own life.
Awesome. And locally here, Dr. Laster.
Hi, I'm so happy to be chatting with you guys again today. I am Janice Laster. I'm a gastroenterologist, also trained in internal medicine, obesity medicine, and nutrition. And I have a practice here in Washington, D.C., gut theory, total digestive care that encompasses all of those things, along with other interventions beyond medications with non-invasive endoscopic procedures for weight loss as well. I love being an advocate along with the OAC, trying to get these things sort of approved for everyone to have better access. And yeah, I'm excited to educate.
Awesome. Dr. Laster, let's stick with you here. I mean, for the first question, GLP-1s are almost represented as a magic bullet of some sort right now. And I want to take a step back and ask exactly what this type of medication is and how does it work? What is a GLP-1?
Yeah. I love that it's touted as a magic drug. It's not quite magic. It's amazing, but not quite magic. GLP is a hormone that comes from our small bowel. Those of us who studied obesity or nutrition or obesity medicine board certified know this is drugs comes from your small bowel and works on the arcuate nucleus of the brain to help patients with satiation, to help with energy expenditure. And that's sort of how the medication works. It's something that we already create in our body. So everybody who, says, oh, no one needs this medication, like, oh, it's so harmful. I'm like, or it's something that already comes from our small bowel, right? But the problem with what we create is the half-life is really, really short. But these pharmaceutical companies have found a way to make this drug stay around in the body for a longer period of time, which is why it has such a great effect and why it's only needed to be taken once a week. So it is a hormone that we already create in our body that works on a part of our brain that controls appetite, and satiation and hunger, and all of those things that make up sort of how we maintain our weight.
So overall, Joe, this seems like a net positive to me. Can you talk a little bit about the history of obesity medications, and why now? Why haven't we seen effective approved obesity medications in the past?
Yeah, I think most of us who've worked in this space for a long time actually are, we always knew we'd have these amazing medicines that would help people. We never thought they would work in so many people, right, kind of thing. And that's one of the interesting things. And if we look back historically, you said this in your opening remarks, right? We started with amphetamines, all those years ago. And then I'm old enough to have lived through the fen-phen era and things like that. And, one of our challenges is that we've had a lot of starts and stops around obesity medicines in the past, right, kind of thing. We've had agents that showed promise, but then had significant side effects that had to be removed from the market. And then we had this weird gap of more than a decade where many of us, myself included, who are advocating around this were shocked that we weren't seeing development of new medicines. And of course, we did some advocacy around that, and we saw companies start building new medicines, and we saw the FDA starting to approve new medicines. And then we arrived till today, right, kind of thing, with these medicines which have rose to popularity, I think, faster than anyone predicted because of that past history, right? There's always been some skepticism around this. And so I think it is safe to say that some people have been caught off guard by the rise of the quick rise of the popularity. We thought we'd have more time to build the systems, right, to make sure everyone had access to these treatments. But unfortunately, we are where we are, fortunately, because these medicines are game changers if you can access them. But unfortunately, many people can't. And so we have to get the system to catch up to make sure everyone can access them moving forward.
So I appreciate the access issue. I think there's a distinction between market access and patient access when it comes to this, and especially for the most unserved populations that need to be able to get access, which are also showing our highest rates of chronic disease. So now that we have this like baseline understanding, if you will, of the science behind this, about how this works, what does this practically mean for patients' lives? And Dr. Laster, I want to talk to you about kind of how do these GLP-1 drugs fit into the larger picture of treatment plans for your patients? You mentioned you only have to take it once a week. How does that, how do you fit them into an overall treatment plan?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think that's something that we speak a lot about when we talk about education and sort of access and why these things are such big game changers. They're a great piece of the puzzle. And it's not the only piece of the puzzle, right? It's also teaching patients how to eat. So the goal is not that you just eat less Chick-fil-A or less McDonald's. The goal is showing people how to create a real meal plan, how to think about food. The other thing that's game changing with the medication is it helps patients to sort of change how they feel about food, change those cravings, change the noise around food. And that's the part that prior to these medications was really hard to get patients to do, right? So I can tell you all day long to, avoid snacking at night and these sorts of things. But if you have some type of emotional craving or things that are stressors, or this has just been a habit for the last 50 years of your life, me coming in and just offering this wonderful advice of don't snack at night. Duh, they don't want to snack at night, but it's this thing that keeps telling them they have to. It's like this compelling thing, right? So it's the best thing when patients are like, oh my God, is this what normal people feel like? I'm not thinking about food all the time, right? So it's an amazing tool along the journey when I'm trying to institute those changes and those habits and getting people to think about those things that are happening and those changes that are being made. So they don't recognize the drug as doing the only thing that's doing the work, because they're doing the work too. You're consciously making the decision to eat a healthier meal, right? The medicine is helping you to stop, to slow down, to pay attention to foods that make you feel a particular way. That's one of the fun parts, is that people slow down enough to recognize, oh, when I eat a meal that's heavy in meat or greasy foods, I feel like crap. I have heartburn. I have nausea. I'm constipated. I feel sluggish. Maybe that meal isn't such a treat as I thought it was in the past. And it's really hard to get patients to recognize that in the beginning, because they're so used to feeling that way. Americans are used to feeling fatigue and tired and heartburn. That's why they have all of these heartburn commercials that you see all the time. They're used to being constipated. And so when you are able to give them something to help them to change, and they recognize how they feel differently, it's really easy when they say, I'm going to give myself a treat, Dr. Lasser, and I say, okay, well, let me know how that treat goes in a couple of days and send me a message. And they almost 100% of the time say, oh, that was awful. Why'd you let me do that? But it's sort of changing, helping, so that medicine is a tool. So people are changing that mindset for the long run. So they're, changing their diabetes risks. They're changing their high cholesterol risks. So that's reducing their risk of heart attacks and strokes. So it's really a great tool.
I'm curious to hear from both of you on this, because I feel like there's a medical answer here. I also feel like there's kind of a social political answer on this as well, which is, I want to talk about side effects. Anytime you introduce a medication into the market, people are like, oh, well, you're going to have bone density issues, or you're going to lose, you're going to have GLP-1 phase, which is very similar to just losing weight. And there's all these side effects, which I know isn't real, but I feel like have really picked up since COVID as well. So can you talk a little bit about the side effects of these drugs on gastrointestinal health? Is this something that patients, I mean, especially liver patients, how should they be thinking about this when they're considering asking about treatment? So Dr. Lasser, I'll let you jump in first on the medical on this. And I do feel, Joe, I want to hear your opinion on this as well.
Yeah, I think it's something that I think you have to be aware of and understand how the medication works. And if you have to understand how the mechanism of action of the medication, right, before you prescribe these things. So if I have a patient that has chronic constipation, chronic nausea, or gastroparesis, I understand how the medication works. I'm not going to offer this medication to that patient, right? Or these are things that we're going to work on first. If you come in and you have a bowel movement twice a month, then yes, this medication is going to make you feel god awful. And so I think more providers need to understand how the medication works and not just throw the same thing at everyone, right? So that's the first part of it. And then also explaining to the patients. My patients, I talk about the nausea, the constipation, and or diarrhea. We talk about how you feel satiated sooner. And so I think it's about patients understanding that piece. So my patients didn't freak out. And when they saw all of these articles come out about, what did they call it? Stomach paralysis. They just, they just have all these beautiful names to scare people, right? And so my patients were sending me all of these articles. They was like, oh, but you told us already that you just have slowed emptying, you have slowed gastric output. And that's what that means. It's not paralysis of the stomach, but if somebody had gastroparesis, which is what that term actually means, I wouldn't prescribe this medication to them. So there are real side effects. They should be monitored. So I think some of these things people just get it from online. That's why I don't really like those, because you should be monitored. The goal should not just simply be increasing people to the highest dose, because that's not also what their goal is. That's when people start eating too much, and most patients don't get to the higher doses, right? Because that's not the goal. The goal is not that you get to the highest dose and you just continue to lose all of this weight. My goal is that you're eating just enough, so you're getting enough protein, so you're not losing muscle mass, so that you're not having loss in bone density. That's why you should follow up with someone, so I can make sure you're doing weight-bearing exercises, so I can make sure you're getting enough protein per meal, and we're thinking about how to craft those meals. So I think seeing a provider and seeing them frequently is very important. And I think it's also important to know your patient, and so that patients understand the medications as well. I have many patients that come in and say, I want this medication right now. And I'm like, not so fast. Let's do these things first. Let's make sure you're drinking enough water. Let's make sure you're sleeping. You make sure you're eating 3 times a day. A lot of patients don't eat. Why am I going to give you a medication to make you eat less when you already don't eat? So there's so many things that I think there has to be a relationship. People have to learn how to eat, learn that it's not a magical drug. And the goal is not to get to the highest, race to the highest dose and just eat, 300 calories a day. That's not the goal. So I think those things are pretty big when it comes to side effects.
That's very well stated, very applicable kind of best practices as we go from this. But I do feel like there's a component that's almost a little conspiracy theorist when it comes to talking about the side effects on this as well. Joe, talk about kind of what you've seen around the discussion around side effects. This.
I agree, Jeff. I think first I want to agree with everything Dr. Laster said. I mean, I like to phrase this that these are serious medicines for a serious problem, and you need to be under excellent clinical care while you're using these medicines, right? I think a lot of the conversation about side effects we're seeing right now are people who do not have good clinical care. They're literally filling out a form online, or in effect buying these medicines illegally, right? From drug dealers, right? Who are selling these medicines and taking advantage of people. So I think that's a part of it. The other thing from a social perspective, Jeff, it is funny, like as I started seeing all these headlines about, I won't say they name a brand name and say it face, or they call them baby, GLP-1 babies or whatever it may be. Like this is just history repeating itself to me. So, I mean, this could have been 15 years ago, and we were talking about, kind of the onset of bariatric surgery becoming a more popular kind of thing. And there were all these articles about people losing their hair, or they're now needing, fillers, or suddenly lots of babies being born. And it's just history repeating itself, right? All of those things that are being talked about are likely side effects of significant weight loss, right? Kind of thing. And it's something that if you're in a high quality program, you are educated about and you know how to deal with. I worry when we see these headlines and that, people are forgetting that it's not really the medicine that's doing that. That's actually the significant weight loss that people are experiencing. And so we should learn from that. And again, back to that whole thing with all of these things, I think the key to this is to, these are not taken in a vacuum, right? These are taken under good medical care, because not only your medical care for your obesity and losing weight, but once you start losing weight, we have to address all your other health complications that may be getting better during that time. So you may be reducing other medicines and things like that. You need a skilled provider who can do that work with you.
I think of it a lot like, and perhaps this is just my skewed perspective on this, but I think about it a lot like climbing Mount Everest. That's probably, not a Herculean task we want to present in front of our patients. But, if someone were to take one of us, you or I, or actually all of us are basically at sea level right now, and just plop us right up on the top of Mount Everest, that would not go well. And instead, what you do is you acclimate, and you can have oxygen on the way, and you have to make sure that you're hydrated, and you go up a little bit and you come back down, you go up a little bit more, you come back down, and you work your way through it. So there is a big dog in the room when we talk about GLP-1s that I want to talk about here. Which is, I want to ask about the compounded GLP-1s. People are often confused. I think they don't understand that a compounded GLP-1 is maybe a little different than the regular GLP-1, than the brand names on this. And wow, all the GLP-1 ads that we see, they don't seem to be equal, if you will. I mean, there are ads all over social media. There are ads on the Super Bowl. We know that celebrities are endorsing this or talking about their journey with this as well. What should patients know when looking at these ads to kind of identify compounded versus non-compounded, and how should they choose? And I would love to hear from both of you on that as well. Dr. Lassiter, why don't you lead off?
I think this is a very poignant question. And I think it brings up the political part of things as well. And I think the reason these things have come about is because of poor access. So it just created a breeding ground to sort of prey on people, to be like, oh my God, this thing is working for all these people. I can't get access. Let me try this other route. So that could be a whole different conversation. When I talk to my patients about it, so patients that are not approved for the medication, and they ask about me, whether I will prescribe those. And I think I talk to them about the fact that I don't know what I would be giving you. That would be like me going outside and just picking up a bunch of herbs and pushing them together and giving them to you and hoping for the best. And I don't know what will happen, right? I don't want to give people something that I don't know exactly what is in it and what the outcome would be, something that's been FDA approved. And so that's what we sort of talk about in detail, and sort of paying attention. I had a patient actually who, because I wouldn't, and she couldn't get it, she told me, she goes, I'm just going to try it. And we were still following up. And after about 2 weeks, and she's in medicine. So that was like, at least a person that was in medicine, I was like, okay, at least I know she'll stop it if something happens. But I, told her, I don't think this is a good idea. Right. And within 2 weeks, she goes, okay, fine. You were right. It was not a good idea. I felt terrible. All of these things happened. And so it's something that I feel torn about, because I get why people do it. I completely understand it. They are desperate. These patients have tried everything under the sun, and they see that it's helping so many other people. And so that's why they do it. So I tell them to pay attention to, because people will say, oh, I saw this thing online and it's for insert brand name. And I say, how are they giving this to you? And I tell them that's not the brand name medication. So I think a lot of it is education. Tell them how these medications are FDA approved, what type of studies have been done on them, and what the potential outcomes can be for things that have not been studied. And because these medications have to be studied for a long period of time, because if they're shelf stable, they're stable enough for it to be given to stay in your body for a week. And you can leave them out of the refrigerator for up to 28 days, right? For most of them. And so when I'm talking to them about the intricate things that have to happen, and those who took chemistry, I'm telling them, like, all those things you do underneath the lab that had to be completely perfectly done in order for you not to blow up the lab. This is what has to be done for these medications, for them to be shelf stable, for them to give you the same amount of dose over the same amount of time every single time you take it. And they'll notice that one of the people that have tried the company, they're like, oh yeah, you know what? By the end of the 4th day, I was feeling more hungry. I'm like, yeah, because it wasn't stable enough to have the proper half-life. So that's sort of how I explain it to patients. And that would, me giving it would be me giving you something and not knowing the mechanism or what's in it or what side effects you may have. If you go to the hospital, how can I explain to the hospital what to do for you? I don't know, because I don't know what was in what you had.
Joe, talk about this a little bit as well. I'm a little hesitant to throw all compounded pharmacies out. It's kind of a baby with the bathwater sort of thing, but there's some real issues here. And we've seen from what Dr. Laster said, some real needs here to be addressed as well, especially around access and stuff, which we'll talk about in a moment. Joe, what are your thoughts on the compounding GLP-1s?
Yeah, so it's the official position of our organization and some of our partners in the obesity space, the Obesity Society and the Obesity Medicine Association, that you shouldn't use compounded products, right? The reality is, for all the reasons that Dr. Laster just talked about, they're not FDA approved. And as you know, we have a checkered past in this space with obesity medicines, and some slight alterations to these really could potentially do harm, right? It was slight alterations in certain medicines that did harm to people in the past, right, kind of thing. And so I think it's important to recognize that. Without now that being said, compounding is something that is necessary for many people. Many of us, have had children. We have to have medicines compounded so they can take that. I have a dog with epilepsy. He has to have his medicine compounded to do that. Like, there's a legitimate role for compounding, but I don't think it was ever meant to provide medicines to millions of people. And that's what some of the numbers are talking about there. There may actually be more people using compounded versions of these medicines than the actual branded medicines, if we exclude people with diabetes, because lots of people with diabetes on these meds. But for obesity, there might be more people using compounded medicines. And that's a challenge, right? And I will say this, I don't want to shame anyone who is using a compounded product right now. I understand the temptation. I will tell you that if you work with a good obesity medicine provider, there are creative ways they can use branded medicines to get you close to that same price, right? You just have to find a skilled provider to do that, right? And maybe you won't get the ideal doses that were in the study, but you can actually know you're at least getting close to those medicines. I'll be frank, that's what I have to do in my own life. For no amount of money, can OAC buy health insurance for our employees that includes obesity care? It's kind of crazy, right? It's not available in the state of Florida. But so we have to get creative with that. And the price that I actually pay for my treatment is very close to what people are paying for the compounded products right now. So like, if your first step was going to a compounder to get this, I would challenge you to step back and go talk to someone who has an obesity medicine skill set, right? And talk to them to see if they can find more creative ways for you to do that. The other thing I'll tell people that are on, so there are people who go through the whole process, and no matter what, this is their only option. And then I will say it is absolutely critical that you have someone like Dr. Laster, somebody who is a specialist in obesity, caring for you, because they can look for the signs that are different than what would be typically expected. So if you're just ordering this by filling out a form online, or heck, I had a legislator tell me the other day at a meeting that he can literally walk into this bodega in his neighborhood and buy it off the shelf, right? Kind of thing. That's drug dealing, right? That's not legal, right? Don't do it that way. Go to somebody who actually has the skill set to be able to do this moving forward. And again, I think there are people out there, if you ask me, say there's some good compounders and bad compounders. So my challenge is, my guess is, probably a quarter of compounding is probably okay, but I can't tell you which quarter that is. And so therefore, that's why our position has to be, hey, extreme buyer beware when it comes to compounding.
Well, part of what drives the need, if you will, or the desire for the compounded elements is this patient accessibility issue. Are GLP-1 drugs actually accessible? I mean, you guys have talked about other paths and other medications, stuff like this. We've heard a lot about shortages and stuff. How are most patients accessing these treatments? And is it through, which of their healthcare providers? Is it through pharmacies? Is it through the compounders? It's interesting that you say you think there's possibility that compounding may be over, regular prescription, excluding diabetes. But what is the current state of patient access for GLP-1s?
Yeah, if we took a look at the maps of coverage, I would say somewhere around 20 to 25% of people have insurance coverage for obesity medications. And then even if you have coverage, then there are other hoops and hurdles put in place. So for example, you have a high deductible health plan, your first couple of months, these drugs cost $1,000 plus per, and so you might not even be able to afford that within your high deductible health plan, although the companies offer some patient assistance programs, but they're not particularly effective for people who have some coverage but not full coverage, right, kind of thing. And so this is the real challenge in that space. And so one of the realities is, Jeff, is that it's either people who are high income or people who have really good insurance who are able to access these things. But we see great great disparities in who has access to medicines. So I don't know, Dr. Laster, your opinions on that as well, talking to your patients. So.
I completely agree. And around here, there it had been better, over the years, the coverage had gotten better. And now just this year, I've seen so many big insurers that were covering that. I was like, oh God, if I saw certain insurers, I'd say, yes, I'll have to jump through a few hoops and I do a prior authorizations and send in notes and that sort of thing. But I know we'll get covered, right? And now those same plans are changing tiers. And so people that were paying $25 a month because it was covered, now it's $600 a month. That's a big difference. And and who can afford that, right? $600 a month. And these trials, people are on these medications for 68 weeks. And some people, that's a long time to be, on a medication. And some people will need it for a longer period of time, depending on how much weight they need to lose and all those things. So that has been a real challenge, especially this year, I think, with a lot of insurers changing their tier system. And so it was getting better. And now around this area, because people have sort of better insurance, but then now it's sort of going back the wrong way.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is kind of the issue writ large with chronic disease management too, though, isn't it? I mean, if you're only helping the people in the Hamptons and Potomac and Beverly Hills, and not in the obesity belt or rural Appalachia or Corpus Christi, then you haven't really solved the issue. I mean, you've only really, you haven't addressed those most at need. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here and kind of let's begin to wrap things up a little bit. And so at the end here, I want to look into the future. Joe, you and I have been on a lot of advisory boards together, and Dr. Lassiter, you always keep up with the best current medications and practices for your patients. Excuse me. So, Joe, what do you see in the future for GLP-1s or other metabolic medications? Have we hit a kind of a threshold in medication where the challenges will be mostly in the political or payer realm, or do you see like the medications themselves getting better in what's going on in early clinical trials and stuff now?
Well, I definitely think we're going to see more variety of obesity medicines moving forward. I mean, one of the realities is GLP-1s are game changers for many people, but not everyone can tolerate them, right? So I think the next generation of medicines will bring forward even better and more tolerable medicines moving forward. I think the next big change has to be in the payment system, right? We have to do that. By the way, more medicines oftentimes means more players, hopefully lowers prices, and we can bring some of these coverage issues to bear. But there's a big one we're monitoring right now, Jeff, right? Which is, at the end of President Biden's term, he left a gift for many of us, which was that he said that Medicare and Medicaid should cover these medicines moving forward, right? Kind of thing. That's officially in rulemaking right now. And we'll wait and see what the Trump administration chooses to do here in the next couple months, knowing that, by the way, we advocated for that same issue with the previous Trump administration, and we thought we were getting close with them around that topic. So we have some cautious optimism that we will see some of this moving forward. So hopefully more access, better prices means they're made available to more people. And then this continued development of future medicines means we'll have more options to hopefully help as many people as we can, or as many people who want treatment for their obesity.
So, Dr. Laster, that's fair. That's somewhat macro. I want you to talk about the individual patient journey on this. What are the challenges you see for patients in working with these medications, and kind of from your perspective as a practitioner and clinician, how do you see that situation, say, 5-10 years down the road from now?
Yeah, I agree with Joe that there are so many trials that are so promising with different medications and different mechanisms of action, so that we can understand which medication may be a best fit for a patient. So I see that things will get more personalized or for each patient's care. So that I'm excited about. And I think having more will drive prices down because there'll be more competition. The thing that I see being a challenge is us creating more physicians that understand how to treat these patients, because I think it requires more than just the medication for patients to be successful, for them to change that mindset, to change that lifestyle, to be able to understand all the pieces of the puzzle with the sleep, with the stress, with the water, with the movement, with meal prep, with all of these things that surround food. and being healthier in general, and just having patient education. And the more my patients learn, I love it. They'll say, "Oh, I recognize this happened in my, my microbiome is changing. I saw a study in a movie about this. And I realized you talked to us about this," and they're telling their families. And so as that continues to change and to get more people to understand what we're doing. This is not just cosmetic. This is not just frivolous. This is really changing people's lives and their livelihood. So I think that is the biggest challenge. But I think that goes hand in hand in what Joe was saying. If this can get covered, then one of the things we talk about is not just coverage of medications, but coverage of patients' follow-up and them being seen in clinic. That's also so important if they're going to be able to see dietitians and health coaches and nutritionists and their physician, so that they can have actual care that allows patients to be successful long-term.
I feel like, as we were discussing before we actually came live with this, or we started recording, that we could have done a deep dive on any of these individual one questions that could have put us into that, 3-hour podcast sort of time frame on this. And so I really appreciate you guys for your time and your insight. I'm positive this will not be the last conversation we're going to have on this. Joe, where can people find more information about you and the Obesity Action Coalition?
Yeah, it's very easy. Just visit obesityaction.org. And if you're a person living with obesity, we're the organization that represents you. So we'd love for you to connect with us. Awesome.
Dr. Laster, I know you're here in DC, but where can people find more information about your practice, Gut Theory Digestive Care?
You can find me online at guttheoryhealth.com and also social media on Instagram at Dr. Janice Laster.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you guys so much for joining us for today's conversation. All right. We are back with the Is Your Liver Healthy post-conversation breakdown. This time, I'm joined by Global Liver Institute CEO Larry Holden, and as a former chief of staff in Congress, as well as a few other positions up on the Hill, he knows a few things about politics and government. And of course, there's our producer, Lily Bainig, also known as GLI's Associate Director of Science and Public Health. So, GLP-1s, huh? That was a pretty interesting conversation with Joe Naglowski and Dr. Janice Laster. There are so many places we could jump off on this. There's a really encouraging future that we're seeing in clinical trials. There's payment and reimbursement issues. There's certainly the whole relationship to nutrition and physical activity. And honestly, there's this possibility for other indications other than weight loss. A GLP-1 was recently approved for kidney disease. And in the last big few scientific liver meetings, we've seen really great readouts from phase 3 data for MASH and fatty liver disease. So we're actually recording this a few days after my conversation with Joe and Janice. And holy cow, the world moves fast. And in just those few days, the FDA announced that there was no longer a shortage of GLP-1s. And now this is important because that was something that had severely impacted patient access and had kind of created this market for compounded GLP-1s. Let's get into it. Larry, I want to start with you. What's the impact here? With no more shortage, are our issues solved on this?
Thanks, Jeff. No, I think we're far from being sorted. The real issue here is that we know that patients don't have access to the medications that they want and that they oftentimes need. And so, we've all seen the Super Bowl ads, or the ads on TV at night, advertising GLP-1s to patients directly through compounding. And the concern is, well, first of all, we know that the Outsourcing Facilities Association is suing the FDA regarding their declaration that there's no more shortage. So this is far from over, both from a legal standpoint and also a policy standpoint. But at the end of the day, what this comes down to is patients are looking for access to these drugs, and they're having a hard time getting access because the medications are oftentimes not reimbursed. And so they're trying to find a way to get the medications and get them without the coverage. And so they're trying to find the cheapest drug. And the concern is here. So there's the access on the front end, which is causing this drive. But the real concern for us and for our patients, the liver patients and the metabolic dysfunction patients, is that are these compounds safe and effective? And there's some real questions there. And at the end of the day, the compounding and the compounding groups we've got concerns that these drugs are not safe, not effective. And we know that there's a glut of this. A lot of these companies have purchased large amounts. And we expect some of this to slow down, say, in the next 2 months as they go through their stock. But this is a big moneymaker. Some of these companies have made over $700 million in this space. And so we know that it's going to be competitive, money-wise. We know the patients want it. So we're concerned that this is a problem for patients. Again, it comes down to safety and efficacy.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like, we're subjecting patients to market forces, and I'm not against the market in any way, but we've seen, especially in weight loss, and weight loss, quote unquote, therapies, that there's been such a huge demand that people end up going into, let's say, different patient pathways that wouldn't necessarily be approved by their provider in this. Let me ask a quick follow-up on this, because I think it's this will play to a question that you've raised in conversations, Lily, as well. But Larry, talk a little bit about kind of what the role for patients and what patient advocacy can do in this space. What's important? I mean, are we just kind of subject to sitting back and seeing where the market goes, or what happens here?
Well, no, absolutely not. We can't afford to sit back. Certainly not. And GLI has a responsibility to their patients. It's a core mission function of our organization to make sure that patients have safe and effective medications and devices that will sustain their lives and make their lives better. And when we see these types of pipelines occur that could impact that, certainly in a negative way, it's our responsibility to look after our patients, and we will be proactively doing that. So what can we do? Well, we have a Liver Action Network, which is a group of, through our policy arm, where we motivate and advocate for patients. And we do that with policymakers in Washington at the FDA, with Congress and the administration, the presidential administration. So the time to be involved is now. And I think that, again, we need to really, in my view, we need to fight this on two fronts. We need to make sure that the patients have access to the medications, the GLP-1s, which would include making sure that there's coverage for these medications. And then once we have coverage and we continue to fight, and a parallel strategy would also be to work on the safety issue and making sure that we don't have drugs that are in the marketplace that are unsafe for patients. It's a two-pronged approach. I think they're both equally important.
Excellent. Lily, this is actually kind of a nice seg to something, that our guest mentioned. And Larry's talking about this two-pronged approach, but there's also a way to kind of to approach this. I mean, we often have been critical, and I've often fallen prey to it myself, of hoping that we can just find the one pill that's going to make it better. But there's not really a one pill or one dose fits all solution when it comes to this, especially for people with liver disease. And this is part of kind of how we got here, with the FDA taking such an intentional approach. That you think about their mistake they made with the amphetamine approval, and people that are desperately trying, grapefruit diets or wonder cures like that. So with the compounding news that we've just had, and the conversation that we've just had with Janice and Joe Nikolowski, and with Larry's insights, I'm curious, what are your takeaways on this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we should have been so surprised by the demand, because we know the prevalence of diabetes and obesity. We know the prevalence of liver disease. It's as high as 1 in 3 in our country. And so we have an idea of what the population that might need this is, but we didn't have the infrastructure set up on the front end to really be prepared for this, which is how we kind of got in this situation, which kind of ties directly back to what Larry was saying. A silver bullet treatment, and this really is a breakthrough, only works for the people who can get it. And so in many cases, we've seen that the rich and the powerful and the famous have access, but the people who really have the most to gain, the patients on the ground in their communities, serving their communities, taking care of their families, don't have that same access. So I really think that's going to be the next frontier for making sure that this can have the positive impact for society that we want. And the other half of access, which I think Dr. Laster mentioned, was the importance of access to care, not just to a vial of a medicine, but to regular contact with a physician or a care provider who knows what they're talking about, who has that obesity medicine training, who can adjust dosage, who can adjust lifestyle things. It can be very jarring to have your appetite go down, but you still need those nutrients. So I think that's another thing that we really need to build the workforce in, and encourage people to build that expertise so that we can serve patients, because we know how many patients there are, and it's hundreds of, over 100 million.
Well, Jeff, if I might, this really makes me think about what an amazing time it is to be working in this field and to be helping these patients, because we finally have our first, FDA approved drug for NASH. So we know that we can start attacking, through certainly diet and exercise, but now medication. And we can, we have GLP-1s on the market that can make a difference. All of these things at the same time are coming together, and that this group of this population is so large that needs our help, and we can make a difference in their lives and get them out of that pipeline. This is an amazing time. There's a lot of work to be done, but we're certainly on the right track, and we're in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I have to wholeheartedly agree with both of you on this. I mean, it just seems like, the importance of comprehensive expert care is what this all points to. It's like the GLP-1s can be good, but if you use them in isolation, or, something you bought off a, weird website somewhere without your doctor's consultation, it may not have the effects, or it may actually even have detrimental effects. The dosing may be off, who knows what else is in the compounding element, and so I feel part of like what we are promoting here, if you will, or what we're advocating for, is what we do across the spectrum with all liver disease, which is connect with a provider and then include this as, if you're, if this is a possible solution, include it as a part of comprehensive medical care for yourself as well. Okay, excellent. We have really just skimmed over the top of the GLP-1 issue, and I am absolutely positive we'll be talking about this again in the future. Meanwhile, make sure you catch up with the latest information at globalliver.org, and be sure to join the conversation on our socials at Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Now, you're going to see a video version of this on GLI's YouTube channel, but we're also available on all the cool podcast platforms: Spotify, Apple Pod, Pandora, or wherever you're listening to this at. And be sure when you're there to leave a comment, like, and subscribe on your platform of choice, so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes and great conversations. And that may not seem like much, but this gets liver into the algorithm and helps us grow awareness, education, and support for you, frankly, for liver patients worldwide, for those that care about liver health. Do you have a question, maybe a suggestion, a comment, or an idea for a topic for a future episode? We'd love to hear from you. Drop us a note at healthyliver@globalliver.org. I'm Jeff McIntyre on behalf of Global Liver CEO Larry Holden, Lily Bainig, and the team at Global Liver Institute. We'll see you next time. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.